Well, good evening and welcome again to our second week in our class we've been doing called titled Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering, based on this great book on this important subject by Tim Keller. By the way, he's been hosting a lot of live streams, so if you go to Gospel and Life, a lot of what's covered in the book is being covered from his own home too. And I listened to the last one and he had interruptions to make me feel much better. He had the phone go off on one of them. So let's jump right in. I'm doing this through Ring Central, powered by Zoom. And I'm going to share my screen, so just bear with me as I am continuing learning every day. All right, so that is the book. Just as a way of review from last week, I saw this thing. Actually, I was running on Friday, and Shep was with me on his little bike. Impressive. He did 11 miles on his bike as I ran. And we saw this, and I tried to explain to him, okay, this is not working. What's going on? Oh, there we go. All right, my bad. A little bit about last week's class when I saw this. So if you remember, we talked about particularly Buddhism, where you view as suffering is you accept it, but you're seeking to detach from it. So someone wrote on this little trail, desire is the source of suffering, and that is exactly one of the things we looked at last week. We believe Buddhism believes that pain comes from being too attached and loving things too much. And it's kind of interesting. We see it now. Everything that was going on, it felt really out of touch with reality. And then I saw the next one. And you probably can't see it as quite as well as I can, but it says, and so is pollen. So there you go. Everybody's got a little sense of humor right now. So desire and pollen. Well, Christianity doesn't say the problem for us is that we love things too much, but rather what we need to do is love God more. And that's really it. And I got a cat in here and just wanted to hang out. We'll get her out of here. So here we go. So the first thing we want to look at this week is the Doctrine of Creation and what it tells us about suffering. And that really one of the things, and I've been kind of hitting on this in the pulpit when you look at kind of the bookends of our original design and where we're headed, what the Christian worldview is that ultimately what's hardwired into us was never a world of suffering and pain. It's not part of our design. We were never to know toil. We were never to know sweat. We were never to know injustice. We were never to know what it was like to not have God walking with us every day, face to face. That's the life we were meant for. And so a lot of times in suffering, people say these things, or when death comes, they say, well, death is a natural part of life. And Christianity says, no, that's not true. That does not come from Christianity. I mean, sure, death happens. It's normative. But to say it's natural or original design is not in accord with what we were originally made for. We were placed in a garden with this perfect representative Adam. We'll look in a second what all that means. And in the middle of this garden is the tree of life. And that tree reappears later in Revelation, and we'll look at that here in just a bit. But a great quote, someone I love as well, named John Eldridge. In his book titled All Things New, some of you have been reading that, just because you've heard me talk a lot about it. I've never put it down since I started reading it 2 years ago. I've probably read it now 15 times. He says this early on. He says, human beings are by nature ravenous creatures. A famished craving for life haunts every person, and we crave fullness, and it is our design. We were created for unceasing happiness and joy in life, but ever since we lost Eden, we have never known a day of total fullness. We are never filled in any lasting way. And so the Christian view, because of the doctrine of the fall, two things are happening here. One, Christianity does not teach that suffering is always a bona fide one-to-one relationship. So, for example, you see this in the book of Job. There's the bad comforters, Job's friends, they're rebuked by God by their sort of quid pro quo view of suffering. Like, well, this is happening to you because of this. That is never the Christian response. We cannot say that. Now, in general, there is proverbial wisdom. So, if I eat poorly every day of my life and all of a sudden, my health takes a bad turn, then I think we can say in general, that kind of things happen. There's proverbial wisdom and there are consequences, but to say that every suffering is always a result of something else, that's more karma than it is Christianity. And it's actually really cruel to ever suggest something like this to somebody, because we never can know definitively why. And yet, at the same time, suffering is always going to be part of our lives because of Adam. And what God did in Adam, and it's hard for us to get our heads around, especially as Westerners who are individualistic. We don't think corporately like this, but our government's set up like this. We have a representative, and they try to represent us the best that they can. Ambassadors try to do the same thing. They try to represent a nation on behalf of others, but there's never a really true, perfect representative. I mean, you look at opinion polls of whatever president's in office, popularity polls, they're never going to be 100%. So no one's ever going to say that's 100% my representative. But God did give us that in Adam. He did give us the person who represented us perfectly. And subsequently, what the Bible says is when he sinned, we all did, and we reaped the same consequence. So what it means is now suffering has come into the world. They're exiled out of the garden, and their loss, their consequence becomes ours. And so what it means is what we battle in our culture is most definitely this entitlement that we all sort of, I think part of it is definitely what we just talked about. It's a cry for what we were created for, which was a life of unending beauty and no loss, no suffering. But when we fail to take in the fall, the doctrine of the fall, we can be entitled and believe that we are owed a good life. And I struggle with that, I mean, I say it every time suffering comes, and when it's like, why did this happen after how hard I've worked, or this, that, and the other? I've taken all these precautions. Why didn't it happen to so-and-so? In fact, I think we'll look at this in a couple of weeks, but when in sermons, when Peter is restored to Jesus, he jumps off the boat fully clothed into the water to see Jesus on the shore. Jesus kind of tells him about he's going to have a painful death one day. And he looks over at John, the Apostle John, and he says, well, what about him? And she says, that's not for you to worry about. I think we all face this sort of, something we get that way. We sometimes think that others don't suffer the way we do, or we all can kind of do that. Suffering comes to us all of us have it, but we don't always experience it the same, and that's for sure. But it definitely means, again, suffering's unavoidable. And so the Christian view would look at the humanistic view of our responses as very inadequate. We talked about that last week, that we live in the culture that is the least resource for suffering than any other, perhaps in human history. And part of that, though, is you see it. We're always wanting progress. We're wanting this. We're wanting that. We're wanting Eden restored. We're wanting paradise found. But for us to think that we can get there on our own just by more knowledge or education is certainly short-sighted. And so what we're asking for and what we're wanting, the Christian view, is a reversal of the curse and a restoration of all that is lost. And so, for example, when you see in the Gospels, when Jesus does a miracle, it seems supernatural to us. It seems like something like, wow, it's unbelievable. But really, when you really boil down at the end of the day, what was a miracle? It was a reversal, a reversing of the original curse. So whatever that person had been suffering because of Adam to coming down to us all, Jesus is reversing that, and so these are all foretastes of the life we were really meant for, and of course the life we were designed for. Now, I showed that picture in the beginning, of kind of poking at other worldviews that sort of want to escape, away from suffering, accept it, but we want to detach and not feel it, And if we could not desire things as well or ever get too attached to things, then we can avoid suffering. That's not the Christian worldview. We are never told to love people less. We're told to love God more than people or our things. So we're invited into a world to feel and to experience and to enjoy, but enjoy them as gifts from the Creator. So one of the things I most look forward to about the world to come and the renewal of all things, when I am who I'm supposed to be and what I was destined to be and who Christ says I am now, as I look forward to enjoying his creation without worshiping it. Meaning that a lot of things I love in life that are good things sometimes become these ultimate things. They become things I give my heart to inordinately. And we all do that. And so, but what this also means is when we understand this, is that we're invited to love things, to enjoy life, but never make them an ultimate. But it also means this, is that what we do lose in life matters. You know, it's not the Western view where it's everything and we have no hope when we lose the things we love. And it's not the Eastern view that's, well, don't love things so you don't feel pain. Christianity is really nuanced. It's we're invited to love, and yet at the same time, we're also promised that the world to come is not just an escape from this world. You know, heaven's coming to earth, and so we're invited to understand we're not just getting a consolation for a tough life we had and go off into this ethereal world and we forget about everything, right? So if you've seen me mention this before in sermons, that, you know, Men in Black, that little gizmo that they're always using to get people to wipe their minds, a lot of people think that's what the next life is just, and now it's this otherworldly thing that we can't even remotely relate to, and we forget everything. But thank God we're not suffering anymore, and I guess in the end it's all worth it now because we're blissfully happy. So never mind all the evil and suffering and injustice of the world I just came from. That's not the Christian worldview. Keller says this, and one of the problems I have each week, you probably can't see this, but my thing is blocking that. So there we go. He says this, so the resurrection of the body means that we do not merely receive a consolation for the life we have lost, but a restoration of it. We not only get the bodies and lives we had, but the bodies and lives we wish for, but never had before received. And then we get a glorious, perfect, unimaginably rich life and a renewed material world. And that's why I love John Eldredge's book so much. And I don't agree with everything that's in it, but I think he does something we need to do. We need to imagine the next world, but we need to see it in this world. You know, we need to see all that is coming for us in the little things in life, and to have these moments where we see things that remind us of there is something greater and bigger out there in this world, and that even the most beautiful things we encounter in this life, just they fall radically short, and they're pointers for us. And so the Apostle Paul has titled this slide Forward Back Living. When it comes to Christianity, the view of suffering is not escapism. It's actually in a way that is, and I hope it can come through PowerPoint and through this, it's not going off into something to forget about it all. It's going to something, the next world, and it invites us to go back and revisit our pain. And our hope in that now allows us in our suffering to do some of that work today. And so, for example, look at the way the Apostle Paul, in a whole chapter on the resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15, frames it. He says the first man, Adam, talked about him earlier, became a living being. The last Adam, now he's talking about Jesus. He's using the same word. He's saying the last Adam became a life-giving spirit. But it is not the spiritual that is first, but the natural, and then the spiritual. Now, he's not saying ethereal realm here. What he is saying is that, look, the first man was from the earth, a man of dust. The second man is from heaven. As was the man of dust, so also are those who are of the dust, and as is the man of heaven, so also there are those of heaven. That's Paul. He's wordsmithy, but what he's saying is ultimately what's happening is heaven's coming here. And so our eternity is physical. When we're talking about the resurrection on Sunday, it's physical. It's a reversal of the curse on a physical earth and a physical body. Being separated from your body and a spirit is what we call heaven now, really is a bus stop right now compared to what we're going to receive when heaven and earth dance and come together as one. And so this is why he concludes, and he says, when the perishable puts on the imperishable and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. And so what he's saying is look, we can go back victorious over death. Later, the Apostle John in Revelation, he says, I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man, and he will dwell with them. So what does that remind us of? That's Genesis before the fall, before Genesis 3. He will dwell with them. And they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. And what is he saying? He's going to wipe away every tear. So what's the presupposition of that is that you're bringing your tears with you. They're not just zapped away. They come in there and somehow become redeemed. And death shall now be no more. To be swallowed up, consumed, transformed, turned in on itself. There'll be no more mourning, no crying, nor pain, for the former things will pass away. So he's making all things new. But look, in 22, he says, then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street, also on either side of the river, the tree of life. And there it is. Comes back. It's restored, it's renewed, and we can eat of that regularly, and it's always bearing fruit. But this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible that I want to understand it better. The leaves of the tree of life, were for the healing of the nations, and just that's amazing to think that in the state of glory, again, your pain is being revisited. Does that make sense? How can you need healing? That have ongoing healing when you're in the state of if it just is all evaporated and you forget all about it. You don't just forget about it, you come back to it victorious. And so really what the Christian view of suffering is that ultimately the glory of what God is doing is an opportunity that he always is turning even evil and suffering in on itself. The glory of the future life, we take it backwards with us. And so ultimately this, Tolkien, said this, I think it's later in Lord of the Rings when, it says, I think it's Sam says, Gandalf, I thought you were dead. And I thought everything was dead. And I'm kind of paraphrasing, but, it's this whole idea that he says, everything sad will become untrue. Not simply just dismissed, but become untrue. And so the hard thing, I think, more than anything else for us to always get about suffering is, but why? But why? I mean, splurting off stuff for 15 minutes or so, but at the end of the day, when it happens every time, we always ask why. And we can't help but wonder, well, why don't you just not allow Adam and Eve to do that? Or why do you allow it to happen? Why don't you just immediately send Jesus into the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3 and just end it there? But there's a couple things I think Keller in this chapter, and by the way, I should have announced this earlier. So we're on chapter 5, the challenge to faith. chapter 5. That's where I'm taking all of this from. But essentially, the question we always have about why, he brings out a lot of great points for us to consider that we often don't think about, that really do need to be thought through. And look, this is a perfect quote. Look what he says. He says, well, what if that future world that we've just been talking about will somehow be greater for having once been broken and lost? I mean, just let me pause there. This time, I don't know how long all this stuff's going to happen, what's going on right now with COVID-19, and I mean, I'm here in my house working, and my wife's upstairs laying people off through a computer right now. And she's doing that all day in her job and furloughing people. It's a brutal time. But what happens so often is when things are restored to us, when we get our jobs back, when we can be together, when we can just go to the grocery store without a mask on, isn't there a sense in which the joys of what seemed to be so common before and definitely take it for granted become glorious to us now? We don't, and we view things differently. I think that's what he's saying here. So further on, he says, if such is the case, that would truly mean the utter defeat of evil. Evil would not just be an obstacle to our beauty and bliss, but it will have only made it better. Evil would have accomplished the very opposite of what it intended. And later in the same chapter, he says, apart from sin and evil, we would never have seen the courage of God or the astonishing extent of his love, the glory of a deity who lays aside his glory and goes to the cross. Now let me just keep reading and then I'll unpack. So theologians such as Jonathan Edwards and Abraham Kuyper, who believe that because of our fall and redemption, we will achieve a level of intimacy with God that cannot be received any other way. And therefore, the angels are envious of it. What if, in the future, we came to see that just as Jesus could not have displayed such glory and love any other way except through his suffering, we would not have been able to experience such transcendent glory, joy, and love any other way except by going through a world of suffering. And what he's saying, and Edwards and Kuyper are saying to us, is the very thing. Let me go back to the other quote. Actually, it's the one before that. That evil would not just be an obstacle to our beauty and bliss. It somehow in a way enhances it. And that is not to minimize pain or suffering, but the whole picture, when it's all put together for us, we will see definitively that what we see in Genesis at the end with Joseph, when he says to his brothers, because they mistreated him, he says, what you meant for evil, God intended for good. There's just a way in which, evil, and you say, well, why didn't he stop it? And look, the reality is, I don't know why. We can't know why, but we can see some things, what happens as a result. God is showing his power even over it, that he can even turn it in on itself every time for our glory. And so with the suffering of God, then we see things that we wouldn't know. If Adam and Eve never sinned, there'd be one question remaining. And that would be, how far are you willing to go for me? Would you love me at my worst? And we talked about that on Sunday. The thief on the cross, that was just moments before that, insulting him, mocking him. And he sees Jesus praying for people who are killing him. We have a God who's suffering immensely and praying for his creation, who he loves, for killing him. We would never have known that if we had only been perfect from the Garden of Eden until now. We would still not know the answer. I hope you're following that. I think that is rather significant, because with suffering, we do know the cost God's willing to pay to have us, and the promise he gives us for our suffering that we will have one day. And what it means, we have a God with wounds. And if you can read chapter 5, there's sort of example of this is what's seemed blasphemous to other religions, that not only God would demean himself by being so fleshly and coming to earth and doing human-like things like sweating and needing to eat and needing to breathe, but to suffer. What is held out as blasphemy in other world religions, Christianity holds as precious. Because when he suffers, he's not, looking to justify himself. Well, I'm sorry I made you suffer, but I'll suffer too, so now you can understand. I'm willing to do it too. That's not what he's saying. When he suffers, he's doing it to justify us, because we're the ones who turned against him. And we still are. I am all the time. And so that's why we have a great high priest who is able to sympathize with our weaknesses and was tempted in every way. And we have a God who, I think a lot of us say, well, that's great and all, but I want to know why I suffer. And the reality is we can't say definitively, but we know what it can't mean. That we have a God who's willing to plunge himself into love, in the name of love, into immense suffering. We have promises that he's going to wipe every tear, not dismiss it, evaporate it in the sense of just you never remember that. You somehow, we bring it to us. It's going to enhance glory and it will enhance our intimacy with him. That we share in the sufferings of Christ. That's what I think Kuyper was saying earlier about even the angels long for that. They don't get to share in the suffering. We do. We have an experience that they don't have. Full answers will come. I look forward to asking a lot of questions. I do. I have a lot. And I'm going to be busy in heaven asking Christ a lot of questions. And thankfully, we have eternity to listen to them all. So while we can't know exactly why we always suffer, we have half the answer, something Keller says, that we need, and we have it now. We know the why, the what that we need to know is that it means it doesn't mean that he doesn't love us. His suffering, what he does with our suffering, the promise of the world to come, we have enough now to really bank on his character. And those who I have encountered through the years in the church, just walking with them in the darkest moments of their life, the hardest things you could ever endure in humanity, in life. What I see them always doing and experiencing is a promise that he is with them, that he loves them, and in a miraculous way, not doubting his character. And it's not to say there's no doubts, but just him coming along them to reassure his character. And that's what we need more than anything else when we suffer, is we need to know he loves us, and that it's brutal to suffer when we're uncertain of that. And it's cruel that the evil one wants to put such doubt in our minds during that when we do suffer. So I'm done with this part. I'm going to text our guest. Her name is Katie Dugdale. So let me let her know we're ready to go. Ready to go. Let me introduce her quite a bit. A lot of you know Katie. She has helps in our youth group. She's on staff with us part-time. She assists Devin and does a fantastic job with that. And let me stop the share so she can. Here she is. You there? Takes a while. Yo.
All right, I'm here. Can you see me?
I totally can see you.
Okay, good. I can't, so that works.
I was just briefly introducing you to everybody, but how about I'll let you do the talking on that. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and then we'll really get into the hard stuff you guys have dealt with the last 4 years.
Okay. So I'm Katie, and I grew up in Atlanta, and then we have had I have 4 kids, Brian and I do, and they were all born in different states. So we lived in South Carolina when we got married, then we moved over to Georgia, then down to Florida, and then here. So I don't know what you want to know about me. I work at GBR. I mean, I work with the GBR youth. So
yeah. And let's be honest, you keep the whole thing organized pretty well, don't you?
Well, I try. Thanks.
Yeah, you're really good at that.
Well,
So tell us a little bit the journey that you guys have been on.
Sure. So a little over 4 years ago, so I always, when I tell this story, I feel like I need to tell people Selah is fine, because I start talking about it and people get nervous and wonder kind of the outcome. So I've learned to say ahead of time, she's fine. She's doing really well. So a little over 4 years ago, we found out that our daughter, who was then 6 years old, had a brain tumor. She had been really sick starting Christmas, December 2015, with really bad headaches. And it was a fight for about a month to get the doctors to hear me that something was really wrong with her. And so finally we got an MRI scheduled, and they found a tumor, and she was rushed from Asheville to Charlotte to the Levine Children's Hospital. Sorry, my phone is going to distract me. Let me turn that down real quick. And so I have ADD. I'm sorry.
This texting is tough, man. It really is. Yeah. Hey, can I back up real quick? Yeah. That month that you didn't have an MRI, what was that like?
It was really hard. I felt like I was going crazy a little bit, because so she was having headaches at Christmas. And so we took her into the pediatrician, and he couldn't find anything wrong with her. And he suggested that maybe it was anxiety, because we had had a kind of rough year in 2015. And so he suggested maybe she was feeling the stress of that. And, but my husband's a therapist. And so when I came home and I told him that, he said, no, I don't think that's what it is. And so we were hesitant to get her into therapy because we didn't want to diagnose this on her that wasn't accurate. But he did give her some strategies as far as like when she was feeling overwhelmed, to go lay down or separate herself. And she was we all got the stomach bug at one point during that, and she just didn't quit. She just didn't quit throwing up. I mean, we'd get up in the middle of the night, every night. And my other daughter, Abigail, who was 9 at the time, it was like we had this routine. She would come in at night around 2 or 3 in the morning, and she would tell me that Selah had thrown up, and I would go and we'd change the sheets, and we'd go, Selah and I would go sit out in the living room until she kind of calmed down a little bit. And I mean, that was like 3 or 4 times a week that was happening. And so I kept calling the doctor, and he kept saying, well, if she's having periods where she's talking to you and active and eating, she's probably fine. It's just a virus. It'll run its course. But I called him one day and I was like, this is not a virus, and I really need you to do something about it. And so he finally got an MRI order put in. And that was on a Monday, January, and the week of that we had, her MRI was January 21st, and that was a Thursday. So that Monday, he called, and I called the MRI place, and they said it would be a month before they could get us in. And I just told them, I don't think she's got a month. I was like, I don't think she's got even a few days. And so, because she wasn't eating at this point, and she was in bed all the time. And so I was ready. I kind of went in ready to fight for a diagnosis. I knew they would at least hospitalize her because she was so dehydrated. So we went with a bag prepped and ready to be admitted. And then it was like the whole, like I just got completely deflated when we went in after her MRI, because I was ready to fight. I had a journal of all her headaches and what she had eaten and what she had done. And as soon as we walked in, they said she had a brain tumor. And it was like, I didn't know what to do. All the air had kind of been sucked out of the room. And I remember a nurse handing us a piece of paper and a pencil, and she was like, just start writing things down. You're not going to remember any of this. And she's right. I remember where the guy was sitting. I remember that Selah asked for food for the first time in a week. And so she was eating goldfish. And I remember where Brian and I were sitting, but I don't remember anything they said. And then they rushed us over to the cancer center at Mission, where we met a doctor, and Sally Ward actually had our other kids at home. So she drove them up to the cancer center. And there was also a really epic snowstorm coming through. And so
Yeah, I
the
remember that.
Hendersonville was about to get shut down. So they put Selah and I in an ambulance and sent us to Charlotte. And then Brian stayed home with the kids. So we got separated during that time. And it was incredibly scary. Selah was really, very sick. I don't think she passed out. I think she just fell asleep a few times in the ambulance, but they would tell me to wake her up. And then we got to the hospital, and all these people were coming to meet me, and they were introducing themselves and telling me like there was an oncologist and there was the surgeon and there was all these people. But all I could see was Selah not waking up, because they had rushed us from the ambulance to the PICU and they couldn't get her to wake up. And I mean, it was probably 30 seconds, but like, it was like time just stood still. And I thought that was it. I thought we were done. And so thankfully she did wake up. She had brain surgery the next morning. They got the entire tumor, and I was there by myself because everything was shut down and there was snow everywhere. And so Brian couldn't get to me. Nobody could get up from Atlanta where my family is. And so it was really, it was scary and hard. And, you know, I was texting people and calling people, but it just wasn't the same. So, so after that, she actually recovered really quickly, and we got home and she was playing and back to normal. And it was almost kind of like, oh, maybe it's not cancer. Maybe we're fine. And, I guess 3 or 4 days later, the pathology report came in, and it was a brain tumor that was malignant. It's called a medulloblastoma. And it was about the size of a golf ball. And so then we went to meet with the doctor at Mission again, and they had told us, okay, it's not going to be a big deal. She'll do chemo and she'll do radiation and she'll have a couple of inpatient stays. But when we got there, she was like, okay, I have you guys admitted to St. Jude. And I was like, okay. I had no idea where that was. I did not know it was in Memphis. I had no idea that we were going to have to go live there. And so we did. For 8 weeks, we went and did radiation, and then we came home for a month. And during the radiation, family's so important. And I mean, I know it is to anybody, but like our family unit just moves together, and it was so unfathomable to be apart from each other. Mm-hmm. And so Brian.
It was just you and her up there in Memphis?
Yeah, at first. And Brian and I.
Was that during the summer by then, or I can't?
This was in the spring. So for radiation, she did March and April. And what we did was Brian would be home here for like a week with 2 of the kids. And then I'd be in Memphis with Selah and one of the siblings. And then we just kept going back and forth for 8 weeks. And we would drive that 500 miles every week. One of us was driving, and it was crazy. But when we went back for chemo, it was like, we felt like we were on Oprah, because somebody was like, hey, I've got a house for you. And I was like, great. And she was like, but it's not furnished. And we were like, that's fine. We'll just do air mattresses or something. No big deal. And then she called back. She was like, okay, your house is furnished. And I was like, great. And then she called back and she was like, and a cleaning service for 2 weeks. And every 2 weeks. And I was like, yes. So, I mean, we wanted to stay together, and St. Jude only allows for 4 people in housing to stay together. And it was just really cool how it worked out. We were able to do that. So for 4 months we lived in Memphis. And
okay, that was the summer I was thinking.
That was in the summer. Yeah. And Selah went through chemo, and it was awful. And yeah. So, but she got home the day before her birthday, and she was really excited about that. So, but yeah, so that's the condensed. I
think another go ahead.
No, that was the condensed version. So,
well, I think, too, it's just like all these compounding effects, like, I mean, the snowstorm, and Brian couldn't be there, and what he had been feeling and what you were feeling. And then, but then too, in 2016, I think that was when he was starting his practice and trying to get off the ground. So there's all these effects of what's going on, and that's a lot. That brings up a question I want to, I want to be fair because I gave you some questions in advance, ask those, but I definitely want to circle back to trauma.
Yeah.
Because there's but let me just, how did you experience the love of Christ in your suffering? How did you experience him? What was that like?
Um, it was really hard, honestly, because it wasn't happening directly to me as far as the cancer aspects of it. I had to give up a lot of control to the Lord, and there was comfort in doing that. But there were times when I just was really angry that he wasn't answering the things I wanted him to answer for Selah on her behalf, and I kept questioning, like, how is she ever gonna trust you if you don't just do this thing for her? And so having him meet me in that, and just realizing that, like, he loves her more than I do, and more than I know how to, and I love her a lot. And so finding comfort in that she has her own story with this, and that he was orchestrating events for her. So that's one part of it. And then another part is the community aspect. So like, we moved around a lot when we were first married, and our kids were born in different places, but we have collected community as we've gone. And people from every church we've been part of and every town we've lived in rallied around us. People we didn't know were paying our mortgage, and just like, yeah, Brian basically didn't work that whole year because he had just started his practice, but he had to shut it down. And so people rallied around us and provided for us financially and with community. I mean, you guys did the live stream of GBR a couple of times for us, and yeah. So just things like that. I think God really met me in our suffering by surrounding us with community. There were times when I would just picture, we were lonely. We were super lonely during that time. And I could picture our family like huddled together, but this massive community surrounding us in this outer circle, and just like almost like a shield for us. And so, does that answer? Is that a good answer?
Absolutely. I mean, everybody experiences everything differently. I'm going to add a question though. You said something really important, and I think it's important for us to understand about God the Father.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this would have been different if it was just you, wouldn't it have?
Yeah, absolutely. I would have welcomed it in a way, like, I will do this, I will suffer for the Lord. But when it was our child that was going through it, I was angry.
Yeah.
And I was like, this wasn't the deal. Like, this isn't what I signed up for. And
yeah.
So.
And I think in large, those who have had, their children taken from them, we've had several, way too many in our church where that's happened.
Yeah.
Those whose children are battling addiction still, or sickness. I think there's something that folks in your position have an opportunity to understand about the cost God the Father had to bear.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we think of like, oh, well, he had to be satisfied for justice, so there goes the Son satisfying justice, and we forget this eternal relationship that is father-son, and what it is like for a parent to worry about their kids. I mean, even jumping on this, I'm like, okay, did Jeff just fall off his bike and break his arm? I mean, he's done Superpoints right now. It's not Lord of the Flies out there right now, but it's just different. It's much easier if it's just you. Not easier, but it's really hard to see your kids suffer.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I became a believer when I was 14, and I remember just like making bold declarations that I would go to the mission field and I would be martyred, and I'd be totally fine with that. But like, mess with my kid, no.
Yeah,
I don't want you to do that.
You're not the only person I've heard that from. I've heard that from so many people.
Yeah.
Let me get to the next one here, and then I do want to circle back on trauma. Well, and it'll be related to this question, so I'll skip it and we'll get back to it. But many who have suffered say that they would never want to go through something like that again. Would, right? But they'd also say they would not trade it for what they gained for anything. They wouldn't trade what happened for what they gained. Is that true for you?
I mean, again, because it happened to Selah, as far as the cancer parts of it, that's hard to answer. Like, yes, I've gained a deeper understanding, maybe of the love of the Lord, but I don't know how to answer it, because I would never want to say I would put her through that again, like to gain what I've got.
Because it happened to her. I guess maybe a better way to rephrase that would be, what do you have now that you didn't have then, and how are you different? How's your marriage different? How's your
Right.
relationship with your children different with others? Because
Um,
I've known you, I don't know, maybe 7, 8 years. I mean, certainly I've seen a major difference,
yeah.
with,
So I think, yeah, no, I wouldn't trade the growth.
yeah,
I wouldn't trade the growth that came from it. I would not want to, I wouldn't want one of my children to suffer so that I could grow some more.
yeah,
But, I mean, I understand now what it means to join in suffering and how that brings us closer to the Lord for sure. And like, and it might sound sick and twisted, but sometimes I'm like, man, something hard's going to happen, and that's going to force me to be relying on the Lord. Where some people might be going like, man, I really hope nothing hard happens. It's not that I'm hoping for it, but there's sometimes where I'm like, I really understood a lot more when we were going through the fire. And it's easy to forget those things when you're outside of it for a little while. And so no, I wouldn't trade the things I gained, for sure. But in some ways, I'm socially awkward more now than I ever was, because sometimes I just don't know how to have like light and fluffy conversations with people anymore. Especially when we first got back, it was really weird. But
yeah,
so in those ways, like there's some things that I came out of it with that I wish I didn't have.
yeah.
But spiritually, sure, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that you bring up a great point about suffering. It's just so isolating. I mean, it's just one of the hardest things is that when you, even those who've gone through the same thing, doesn't mean you're always going to relate to them or that they may even be a comfort to you. I've known plenty of people where it's really backfired, not been helpful.
Yeah.
But the gist of it is that ultimately it's just what you just described to me kind of reminds me of when the hobbits come back to the Shire after everything, and there's just
Yeah.
kind of, and I think this is a good place where the movie captures it. There's just like the look of sobriety on their faces in the pub they used to frequent often, and that others, um, we losing connection here.
Yeah.
Oh. But anyway, I think what you're saying
But
is just, how do you relate again when things are, when you've been so sobered and others haven't, and they're kind of just going on with their regular life. So you're there now. I see you. Oh, now you're froze again.
right, you froze up me for a second. Okay.
Maybe it's me.
I heard what you said because I got the gist of it.
Okay. Yeah. My wife's on Zoom
You're
calls
still,
upstairs, so that could be affecting the internet.
I can hear you. You're just,
Yeah, it's getting kind of bad. We may have to wrap up.
oh, there you are. You're back.
Yeah, I'm not going to
Okay.
critique the internet service. I'm not going to say anything about them by name, but I just want to say I'm not related to them, just in case you want to know.
Noted.
The last name Morris. I just want to be.
I'm seeing you're back.
I want to be clear. I'm not
Now
related.
they worked with us to up our bandwidth, so you're
Good for them.
worth the call.
All right. Well, we're having issues, folks, and this is life
Yeah.
that's going on here, and I hope we didn't lose all that recording. But golly, that's frustrating. Well, if you're still with us, I hope you stick with it, because I want to ask one last question to you that I think is really important, and that is about trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think you texted me a picture 2.5 months ago, the sailor with Travis.
Yeah.
And then kind of relayed just, there's this rhythm for you, which is you have to go back to St. Jude's. How many times a year? Is it just once or twice?
We go every 6 months now.
Every 6 months. So that is triggering. But then even, losing our friend, that, it's hard not to have something that come back and cause triggers. How just in a pursuit of emotional health, I mean, you're married to a therapist.
Yeah.
How are you guys collectively, how do you take your trauma and are you experiencing some healing in that area?
Yeah, I think we are experiencing healing. I know we are. It's hard in the moments, like when we leave to go to St. Jude. I think I'm fine, but usually about a week before we go, I start having severe panic attacks, and just, especially if it's snowing or something like that in January, it's bad. And it reminds me of how frail I really am with all that. But I grew up in a family that just didn't talk. We didn't talk about things. And so I'm really thankful for Brian, because he pulls me out of myself to talk about things. But I think there's been a lot of freedom to not be okay and to not try to make sense of it. Like, I have panic attacks at random. There's no rhyme or reason for it sometimes. And I've had to learn that that's okay.
Yes.
That the body doesn't play by the rules a lot of times. And so there's healing in, I think, understanding that it's a long process, and that there's not a timeline for when I'm supposed to get over it. And, I am part of a club that I don't want people to be a part of, but I tell you, when you tell somebody your kid had cancer, you all of a sudden get a lot of compassion. And so there is that, that's nice.
And it sounds like what you were saying just a second ago is you're learning to be compassionate with yourself, of just like, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to have a panic attack and not even know why.
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, there's been some healing in that, because I really don't like being out of control. I really don't. I can't imagine anybody that likes that, that feeling, but I really, it scares me. It makes me angry. And so to give myself some freedom, and also, I mean, like right now, it's like we're all taking turns having freak out moments during the quarantine, and to give space to go, that's okay. We're okay. Just have your freak out moment. I don't handle it as well as I'm pretending to right now, because I definitely did not handle a child well earlier that was crying, but having some freedom in that.
I can't relate to that.
No, I know, you're the perfect parent. Like, you don't know where your kid is right now. I don't know where my kids are. So
Lord of the Flies out there. He'll figure it out.
He might end up down at my house.
Kidding.
Yeah, you don't know, you're not.
He's at the neighbors.
But so yeah, there's teaching our kids to have big emotional language has been good, and just giving space for conversation at our house, and me being honest with my kids when I'm having a hard time, being able to say to them, like, I'm just not doing well right now.
Yeah.
And Brian and I, like, we finally, it's 4.5 years later, and we're finally getting to take some steps toward, like, we're going to try to go to a marriage conference in the Seattle school in October, and being able to dream for things that are outside of the realm of St. Jude is huge. And a big healing step for us. So.
Well, thanks for taking the time. I know it's not easy when everybody's at home right now. But I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us your story. It's vulnerable. And what I most appreciate about what you shared is that it doesn't have some forced bow on it right now. I know you have really experienced the love of Christ, but I really appreciated the honesty of, like, even in saying, like, I don't even have it all figured out, like, to diagnose myself. I don't have to diagnose why I just had a panic attack. I don't have to feel great about this. And so thanks for that. And really appreciate it.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Well, thanks for letting me share our story. The more I share it, I think there's healing in that too. So I'm always happy to
Absolutely. And that is one of the blessings of our current situation is, your story is not just in a, normally a class like this would, there'd be 8 to 12 people on a Wednesday night, but, maybe there'd be a lot more who view it, and now they know. And I hope you receive more compassion for that. So,
well, I hope so. Thanks for doing the class. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let me pray for you and we'll close. So, Father, we do thank you that Selah is healthy, and what a blessing. And everything we talked about earlier, forward, back living, that there's a promise for Katie coming, that all her tears, all her anxiety, all her sorrow, all her pain, all her questions, they will somehow radically be revisited with redemption and with your intimacy and with your care and your concern. We thank you for who you are, Jesus, that you didn't just rise from the dead to prove something. One of the first things you did is you asked somebody, why are you weeping? And so I pray for this family, Lord, that you would continue to bless this time, even this quarantine time, with time of renewal, time where they will continue to grow closer to one another. And Lord, you continue to set distance between them and fear. And I just pray against unnecessary attacks coming against their minds and their hearts. Lord, you're good, and I pray that you would firmly continue to plant that in them. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, all right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day. Okay.
You too. Bye.
See ya.